Greetings, programs, and welcome to a new episode of the Awesome Friday podcast. This is December the 18th, so Merry Christmas, in case we don't see you before then, because it's a radio show. Anyway, my name is Matthew, and with me, as is going to be usual in the month of December, is Rachel. Good morning, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Matthew, and early Merry Christmas to you, and Happy New Year. Although I'm pretty sure I'm going to talk to you tomorrow, so really, no point in saying that.
Yeah, that's true. I think we're going to talk twice before Christmas, so... I'm not sure if our listeners are going to hear all three of those times before Christmas, but we are definitely talking at least twice more before Christmas. So
one of them at least will be before Christmas. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, that's true. On your show. I'll be on your show for a change.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to that one, actually. I got prep
although
still.
I say for a change, but it's not really a change. I've been in your show like twice in the past month, so
yeah, but not with me.
But not with you. Just with Dakota, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, like, it'll be nice to talk to both of you at the same time. That'll be the change. So this week it's a little bit different. Normally we talk about two things, and this time we're going to talk about one big thing. We're going to talk about the Whistler Film Festival, which I am watching movies at remotely, and you actually flew out to BC to attend earlier this month.
Yes, Telefilm very kindly sent me and a group of other journalists out there from Toronto, Montreal, and one from Vancouver as well. They didn't fly out, obviously. They just took the bus up to Whistler. But yeah, it was a really great trip. We were there for, was it 4 or 5 days? Something like that in Whistler. So we got to do pretty much all the in-person stuff. Whistler Tourism Board as well got involved, and they brought us up to the peak of Whistler and Blackcomb. We got to have lunch up there. It was really, really lovely. It was a very, very swish trip. It was very nice.
Yeah, it is a really beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
Did you do the peak-to-peak gondola thing?
Yes, we did. I'm so bad at like capturing these things on social media because I just don't think to do it. But everybody else in like the gondola was like taking videos, and I went, oh, I should probably take a video. But then I thought, but then I'd have to ask them to move. And I was like, yeah, you know what? It's fine. I'll just sit here and I'll look at their pictures. But it's beautiful, though. I've never been to Whistler in the winter. I'd only been late summer, and that was back when I was like 16, so that was quite a while ago. But yeah,
like at least 3 or 4 years. That's
very kind. But it was very beautiful though, and it was very cold though. It was during the weekend that BC, or Vancouver I should say, got some pretty like unseasonably cold and snowy weather for you guys anyways, and Whistler was very cold, and even the people at Whistler were saying like that this is a lot colder than it normally is beginning of December. Like it's not usually this cold at this time. Got a nice proper Canadian winter early.
Yeah, it was our one cold weekend that we get here. Usually we get it in January, but this year it seems to have come in December. So
I wonder if it'll happen in January now.
It probably will. You know, climate change is a real thing, and
it is. It's freaky.
It's making it's making, even though like the like pond and lakes where my dad lives don't freeze anymore, it is making the weather here in Vancouver worse in the winter, which is a whole thing. It's a really interesting science that we should not get into because it's just weird and
also you and I probably aren't like qualified to be talking about actual climate change situations, but I think what we can say is it's messed up. Like it's messed up.
It's messed up.
And something needs probably, I don't know if something can change. Although
I get the
we're not getting into this.
But... Yeah, I just get the feeling we're past the point of no return. So it's
well, what I was gonna say is, you remember growing up and they were saying like that all the talk was about the ozone. It was all the ozone layer, and they're like, it's ozone this, and like it was very petrifying when we were kids. That was all we heard. And now they're saying like it's like whatever we've done since the time of when we were children, the ozone is patching itself up because of hopefully some of the changes that have been made. So
no, that's true. Actually, we the CFCs that we can't remember what that even stands for because it's been so long. But the things that were damaging the ozone were banned, and now the
Hmm.
ozone is fixing itself. So like we can
There you
have an
go.
effect.
Yeah.
It's just that we aren't banning all the things that are other things that are ruining the
I
environment.
would also say
So
we're not targeting the right people. Like people want to like I think the whole messaging of getting on individuals to be like make sure you recycle, make sure you do composting, which is
oh yeah,
good and I think that's great. But truly, like an entire community, an entire suburb, like the difference that we can make versus Amazon, for
yeah.
instance, is
I don't remember
vastly
the
different. So
I don't remember the statistic, but it's something like 70% of all pollution comes from 100 corporations.
yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all because I mean, look at the warehouses of Amazon, like Amazon alone as a company. But anyways, I just
Anyway,
received like 2 Amazon packages this morning, so I probably shouldn't be talking.
I mean, you're allowed to exist in the system and also criticize it. Is all I'll
It's
say.
very true. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And so that's very much like the Whistler Film Festival and also Christmas.
Seamless segue.
Seamless
Seamless.
segue.
Seamless.
Yeah. So we don't have a like a set of two movies to talk about. Rachel, you've obviously seen way more than I have because you flew out here and have more free time than I have had recently. I've only seen three movies so far because I'm covering remotely. And how many have you seen?
To be honest, not that much more. So when we were there, we ended up seeing like a few movies in person. But actually a lot of the movies that I sent you a list of like, oh, these are all the ones I've seen. I've actually seen them at like other festivals.
Mm,
So there is that. But I did get to catch up on Knives Out while I was over there because I was seemingly the only Toronto film critic who had not seen it yet. So I had to go watch it in theater in Whistler. I watched White Noise while we were there. Did not really like that. And then a bunch of Canadian movies. So there was we're gonna talk about them, but like there's Diaspora, Alice Darling, which is technically Canadian.
hmm
Niagara, which I really enjoyed. Sanctuary, which is not a Canadian. That was at TIFF. That's like another one that was not necessarily a Canadian or Whistler film
hmm
for the festival, but it was one that they picked up on the bigger one. So that was great though. So it was nice to be able to catch up on some of the other ones. And they have like I didn't even know that they had movie theaters in Whistler, to be honest. Like it just didn't occur to me that there would be one. But it's a
hmm
pretty sweet festival because like it's very, very casual. So you have
Yeah.
people who literally come up off the mountain after they're done skiing. They still have their snow pants on. They leave their snow gear like at the door and then they go sit down and like they literally just came from skiing and I'm like that's incredible. I love that. Like I think that that's
Yeah.
such a cool it's a cool place to
Whistler's
do a film festival.
Whistler's such an interesting, weird place. Um, and I really like it. I actually really like it all year. Uh, I think it's actually just as great in the summer to go
Yeah.
up there and just hang out. It's just a
From
cool,
what I
chill spot.
remember, yeah. I mean, again, it was a long time ago, but like it is very. I mean, you live in a very beautiful province, though. Like as much as I like to shit on BC a lot, like BC is a very very beautiful province, and you guys have a nice diversity of landscapes, which Ontario does not have. So
Yeah, I was talking to someone else from Ontario just the other day about how they moved here for the skiing
mm,
because and I was like, well, there's a ski resort technically where my sister lives
nah,
in Collingwood,
Collingwood.
and then we
Yeah.
were both like, but it's more like a hill. It's like a
It
hill.
is.
It's
When
not a
you've
mountain.
actually when you've actually gone to like even Tremblant over in Montreal, like when you've actually gone to other places, or I should say Quebec, it's not Montreal, but like when you've actually gone to other proper ski places, you're just like, oh yeah, Blue Mountain's not really can't really call it a mountain. It's just
God,
a
Blue Mountain. I was struggling to remember the name of it yesterday. Blue Mountain. That's the
big
one I
old
was thinking.
hill. But yeah, you go to Whistler. I mean, Whistler's the big. I could be Whistler's the biggest in Canada, isn't it? Yeah. And that's a, I mean,
Certainly the most like the most prestigious, I guess would be the
yeah,
word for it. Like the world, it's the world class one.
it is. Yeah. And that was going to be my point was like, there are people from around the world who will travel there, to like, it's a place for skiers, snowboarders that
I
kind
mean,
of
there's
thing.
a reason
So
that the local accent is Australian. It's
I met so many Aussies there actually. Like it was a very like the first few couple like the first day or two. It's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. There's so many Australians here. Then I kind of realized, well, yeah, because I get it. Like they all came here to do the ski and the snowboard and all that
yeah,
fun stuff. So, and I like that the
exactly.
Olympic rings are still there. That's quite cool. It's fun.
Yeah, we still have a lot of Olympic stuff around here.
Yeah.
It's
Well, why take
for
it
better or
down?
for
There's no
worse.
point. No, it costs a lot of money. Leave it. Like
Yeah,
just
it
leave
really
it.
did. It really did. it's, that's a whole other discussion. But anyway, that's again very much like films. So I think I said I've seen three, but I guess if you count things I've seen elsewhere, like I think
Hmm.
technically Guillermo del Toro's
Yep.
Pinocchio played as part of this festival too. So I've seen more than just three.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to focus on a couple of Canadian films because that's the one thing this is my third time with access to Whistler Film Festival. And the thing that I've come to appreciate it most is that it ends up being the festival where I see the most Canadian stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and as it turns out, we make a lot of good films. You know, like it's people we don't we often I don't think I think we underappreciate Canadian cinema, and I feel a responsibility to try and rectify that. So let's talk about some Canadian films.
Canadian films
Uh,
and a lot of like BC films too. Like there were actually a lot of BC filmmakers at the festival,
yeah,
which was cool. Very cool.
yeah. So which one should we talk about first? I think we should talk about. I think the most interesting one. I well, they're all interesting, but we're going to talk about I think Diaspora and um, Polaris pretty specifically. But like rapid fire, like what else? What else? Like just like what's like Cole's notes on a couple of the other ones you've seen?
Niagara is a really fun French Canadian movie. If you're into French Canadian humor specifically, like it's quite dark.
Hmm.
But the thing that drew me in was the little 1-2 line tagline that they put with the movie, which was I'm paraphrasing here, but it was basically like three middle-aged men. Their father has just died because of while participating in the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. That was literally it, and I was like, "That's funny." So I was
That's
like,
funny.
I'm gonna go watch this," and it ends up being quite a moving film about brothers and family, and just kind of middle aged malaise, but very very French Canadian as well. Like it's got some great humor to it, and I really enjoyed that one. There's another one, Midnight at the Paradise, which is actually one that we saw as a group in Whistler. That one is directed by Vanessa Matsui, and that's like a very, very Toronto based one, actually. And it's about a couple or two couples, and one person from each of the couple previously had a relationship, and they find themselves in Toronto. Um, kind of a, it's not really like the Before trilogy, but it has that feel to it, in my opinion. And all the performances in that are exceptional, actually
Mhm.
exceptional. What's another one that I saw there? Oh, Sanctuary is one. I mean, like, it's not really fair to say because Sanctuary's um, it was like a TIFF movie, but I loved it. So anybody who hasn't caught up on Sanctuary yet, definitely go watch it. It's kind of like dominatrix, but not like in a weird. It was definitely a COVID movie because it's just two people in an apartment. But it's very cool. It's got like a lot of Hitchcock vibes going on in it. And
Sanctuary. I don't have it in front of me, but Sanctuary is the one with Margaret Qualley, I think.
yes, yeah, that's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah. It's cool. Like it's the colors in it are really amazing. Like I was really, really captivated by that movie actually. And the last one was Boy City, which are we going to talk about Boy City? No.
Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit, I think, because I definitely stayed up way too late watching it last night. um, and it is, I don't know if I can go so far as to say that it is a good movie, but it
Yeah.
sure is dumb. and,
It's so
and
stupid, but like I loved how stupid it was.
yeah, I mean, I feel like I didn't really connect with Boy City in the way that it needed me to, but I
Yeah.
feel like if you connect with it, you're going to connect with it pretty hard. Like it's a
I
very
realized
specific brand of stupid.
Yes, I realized too, because like I mean, I was a big fan of so Boy City is basically like a send up of boy bands from the '90s and early 2000s, but set in present day. So it's a bunch of
I
like
mean,
middle-aged, like mid-30s men, like 35 to 40-year-old dudes who still have this belief that they can um, make a boy band, but they're grown-ass men. And they talk about like with great reverence, like Justin Timberlake, like one of the guys changes his name because his name happens to be Justin, and he doesn't want to disrespect Justin Timberlake, so he changes his name to Justin.
with an
And
A,
it's
Justin
so
with an
silly.
A.
It's so dumb. Yeah, it's really, really silly and dumb. But I think because I loved boy bands so much growing up, like it's just the perfect thing for me. And I actually realized when this morning when I asked you how'd you like it, and you're like, I was like, I should have told you to watch Niagara because I actually think you would have really liked Niagara. That's actually probably one that was more up your street. But I think because I had just finished my review writing it, that's probably why I thought about Boy City.
I mean,
Um,
maybe. I mean, like I say, I didn't really connect with it the way it needed me to. But there are a
mhm.
couple of moments in it that are legitimately laugh out loud funny. Uh, in particular, like there's one joke right at the very beginning where one of them points out that the golden age of music was 97 to 04. Just like, and like, yeah, like I grew up in Canada around that time, and boy bands were certainly like a thing here, and I think a thing here in a way that they weren't necessarily in other places in the world too. Like I think it is a very Canadian specific thing. Like
Yeah.
um, that's actually like I'm sure you've seen This Is the End,
Yeah. Yeah.
which ends with a Backstreet Boys
Yes.
number. And the reason it ends with a Backstreet Boys number is that Jay Baruchel and Seth Rogen are Canadians about my age, and the Backstreet Boys were huge here about a year before they were huge in the States, and we
Yeah.
just all grew up with them. So like it's definitely a Canadian thing. Like boy bands are a weirdly Canadian late
Yeah.
'90s thing.
Well, I think it's also as a boy band fan, it was a lot of boy bands from Ireland and the UK, and that was how the
Hmm.
Backstreet Boys got to us early was because they were huge in Germany, like really big in Germany, and then they made their way over to Canada first. It was like YTV Hit List. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember that show. But
I
that was
do.
where like a lot of that stuff came from, and that's how I learned a lot about different boy bands like Five and Boyzone and those guys. Like they weren't necessarily big in the States, I don't think. Now I
Except
think it's
for
really different. Now I think it's with the internet. I think there isn't that thing of like, oh, you're big in one area and then you move to Canada. If you're big in Europe, then you come to Canada, then you go down to the States. Now it's just all at once. But yeah, I enjoyed Boy City though. I thought it was funny. Jonas Chernick has like a little tiny role in it, which is
yeah, I was
um
gonna say he
delightful.
turns up, and he is hilarious for his
Yeah.
approximately 8 minutes of screen time.
Yeah. Very briefly, but he's delightful in it. It's
Yeah,
amazing. I love it. Yeah, he's great.
yeah. I
But
think
yeah,
my
I think it's a fun movie. So if you're into boy bands, that's a cool one to check out.
yeah, and I think like if like I say, it's a very specific brand of stupid humor as well.
Hmm.
And if you're gonna connect with it, I think you'll connect with it pretty hard. A bunch of it really didn't land for me, but the stuff that did, like the jokes that do land, I thought were really funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always tough with comedy that
I think you got to be in a
to
good
recommend.
headspace for that one too. Like you got to be ready to be like, I'm gonna watch something really stupid. But I do apologize because I should have told you Niagara because I actually think you'd really like Niagara. Still watch it. It's a great. It's actually quite funny. I enjoyed that one.
Well, the nice thing about Whistler Film Festival is that even though the in-person portion is over, the online portion lasts until I think January 2nd. So I got
Yeah,
lots of time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, talk about. We already talked about Niagara. We don't talk about that again. Let's move on to, um, I guess, Diaspora, which I think is
Hmm.
one of the most interesting films I've seen in a long time.
Yeah,
It's the story of a young woman who moves to Winnipeg from the Ukraine, and she based like there's not really that much of a story. That's pretty much the entire setup. She moves into a really rundown apartment, and just starts existing in the north end of Winnipeg in the diaspora that exists there. And what's a really interesting choice about it is that she doesn't really speak English, so we get subtitles for her, but no one else in the movie really speaks English either, and they're all speaking different languages, and we don't get any subtitles for any of them.
yeah,
Uh, and I just thought it was super interesting. I will also say this movie is way too long,
yeah.
but
I agree.
but super interesting and really, really well performed by the lead actress as well. I don't know. What did you think?
Exact same thing. I caught up with this in Montreal actually earlier this winter or fall, I guess in the fall.
Hmm.
Um I loved it cuz I like the idea of so actually funny story was when I was supposed to go to a film festival in Montreal. I was supposed to be on a jury there, but then I ended up getting COVID, so I couldn't go.
Mm.
But the I was looking at the printout because they sent me a bunch of links so I could watch it at home instead. And for that movie in particular, they listed the subtitles and they just kind of and it was kind of a glitch in the system, I think, because they said like Afrikaans, and I was like, that's weird. Like, why is there Afrikaans? And they didn't list English and French, and every other movie basically had subtitles listed in English and French. So I emailed the PR people and I was like, hey guys, like, just want to make sure that I got the right copy. Like, maybe I just got the wrong link or something like that. And they said, no, like the kind of the point is there's only one character gets subtitles, which will be in English for you, but everything else, you don't see subtitles. So I went, okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. And then that kind of piqued my curiosity about what this movie was going to be and how they were going to do it. I completely agree with you about it being far too long. I believe it's over 2 hours, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
it's like 2 hours and 10, I think.
Yeah, and
Like
this
it's
could have been
very, very, very long.
it could have been a real tight 90-minute movie. And because it's like you said, there's no real storyline to it. Like we're just watching a young girl acclimate herself to a new country where she doesn't speak the language. She doesn't have to, and like there's moments of her thinking that she's found, like one of the kind of the saddest moments to me was when she was so excited to find the Orthodox Ukrainian church, and she was jacked right. She got all dressed up to go to church on Sunday, and then she shows up and it's like turned into a Filipino Catholic church basically, and
Yeah.
she's just like okay, like, and I felt terrible for her because that idea of you thought you found some people after a pretty lonely entrance into a new country, only to find that yeah no that's not how that's going to work out for you. um so it's really like a slice of life of a new immigrant, and because nothing really big happens in it, I should say, like it just doesn't need to be that long. But it's I still think it's a great movie. It's a very interesting film. There's a lot to be talked about, and it actually had its premiere in Winnipeg just last week, actually.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a great, and it's a bit of a shame. I don't think it's made as much noise as I think was expected of it, because it is quite topical as well these days. Not just because she's from Ukraine, but just the idea of the diaspora and migrants coming into Canada and what that's like for them. And I think a lot of people might be surprised how diverse Winnipeg is. Of all cities to choose in Canada, that this was going to happen. Like Winnipeg was, to me, a really interesting choice.
Yeah. It's definitely. I just checked too. It's definitely very topical for the day with Canada basically needing immigration, but
Hmm.
how do we treat the people who arrive here? Um, and yeah, it's 2 hours and 21 minutes long, not 2 hours and 10. It's definitely like I don't want to harp on this, but it is way too long. You're right. It could definitely have been uh, a tight 90, which is interestingly what the next movie we're going to talk about is. The next movie is a perfect tight 90.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's super. As a English speaking white dude in BC, which is a fairly diverse city, really.
Hmm.
Like I don't I think this movie is interesting because it really highlights parts of the immigrant experience that I think that we don't ever think about, and I think that's obviously the point. But
Hmm.
you don't really think about how difficult it must be to communicate moving to a whole new place by yourself, where and you end up living in kind of the shitty part of town, and you can't really learn the local language because nobody else there speaks it either. Um, and there doesn't really seem to be any systems in place to like help, and
Yeah.
that really sucks. And it makes me feel like we should do something about bettering our immigration system and just our social systems in general. But
Well, I mean, it's
that's a
interesting because So my when my parents came to Canada, they went from Hong Kong to Edmonton, or Grand Prairie, Alberta, I should say more specifically. And that I know for them was obviously a massive culture shock because you go from Hong Kong and it was freezing. Like they came in like September, so it got cold really quickly for them. And but I think one difference for them was there were a lot of other. So they came over here for post secondary school. Um, and the difference is there was a lot of other Hong Kong students who had come over, and so there was a little community of them, many of whom they're still friends with, and some who still live in Edmonton.
Hmm.
Um, but I think, kind of talking about Winnipeg as a city, I think it's really interesting choice because, like you said, like there was nothing really there to help her out. Whereas if you went to a Vancouver or a Toronto,
Yeah, that's a good point too. There's
or a
definitely
Montreal,
there's a
you
huge
would find a
Ukrainian
community. Yeah,
population here. There's
you would find people.
yeah,
Um, and I think like there's an interesting historical bent too, where one of the kind of the great things in Canadian history that, well, when I was in school, that we learned was about settling the West. Like that was a really big part of Canadian history class in grade 8 or whatever. Uh, and they talked about settling the West and how they basically tricked Ukrainians, specifically, about showing them all the farmland that was available in the prairie provinces, and look how much, like, you're going to be able to make so much money, have such a great life for your family. And then they never really told them how harsh the winter is. They don't tell them how difficult that part of the year is going to be, which is the vast majority of the year, and how
yeah,
farming in the winter is very different to farming in the Ukraine. Like, and Ukraine gets cold, but it's not the same as some of the prairie provinces. And it ended up like a lot of Ukrainian immigrants died a long time ago, because of that, because they just were caught out. Like they didn't realize what they were getting themselves into. So,
yeah.
and the Canadian
They weren't
government.
told they were moving to effectively tundra and or
Yeah,
muskeg.
yeah, and so I found it interesting, like that they specifically chose a Ukrainian immigrant, and they chose a prairie province to do that in, but like in modern day. So I thought, and like kind of it shows in a sense things haven't really changed. She just kind of showed up, didn't really get any help, no support. Because I think these days a lot of people think, well, if you're gonna make the decision to move to another country, that's kind of on you. Like you need to figure your shit out. It's not up to the government to do that for you, which is a bit of a heartless way of looking at it. But
I mean, it is. You know, all of our social programs could use more
the
money.
thing is, we have pretty good social programs, like on relative to the rest of the world, like to most countries.
Oh
Canada's social
yeah,
programs are decent, and that just kind of shows you what the hell else goes on in other countries. Like if it's this bad in Canada, like I don't know. Imagine dropping off in the Midwest in the States. Like what would that have been like? Like yeah, it's very interesting. I really enjoyed this movie because I think it raises a lot of different issues and makes you think about a lot of different things, which I think was very cool.
hmm I also think that just the what plays out, like you said before, that like nothing really big happens in the movie, which is true. But some of the stuff that does happen is super interesting. Like there's a whole
Yeah.
subplot with just like she's living in this like shitty apartment with a landlord that because you don't understand what he's saying, you're pretty sure is exploiting her because he's a landlord. Um, but also there's this guy who just sleeps on her couch every night. And like there's the whole subplot with that guy is just and I don't think he even says anything at any point in
No,
the movie. The
I don't think
only
he says a
interaction
word.
is like her finding him on her couch and then yelling at him as he's like, fine, like I'll just leave. But he doesn't say anything. He's just like slowly gets up and leaves the apartment.
That was my
Uh,
favorite bit, though, was his reaction to the first time she caught him, because she's terrified, as I would be, like as any, I say women, but like I think anyone would be very terrified if you woke up in a strange country and there's like he's like a big dude as well, like this like big
hmm
dude just sleeping on your couch. You'd be like, what the hell? So she's terrified and she's like crying of it, and like in the end when he leaves, but his reaction is just like, yeah, all right. Like he just
Yeah,
gets up. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't do anything. He's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't be here. All right, bye. And
yeah,
then he keeps coming back. And I think that, yeah, I love that ongoing bit as well. I shouldn't call it a bit, but yeah, I like that.
yeah. The evolution of their relationship, such as it is really really interesting, and
Yeah.
ultimately ends up being a bit heartbreaking toward the end. But
Yeah. It does.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a super interesting movie. I mean, how many stars would you give this movie? I'm gonna give it a
Um,
solid 3, just for the record.
yeah, I haven't, my review hasn't gone live yet, but I gave it a 7 out of 10, so I know I'm not allowed to do half stars on this
Yeah,
one though.
seven translates to 3.
So yeah, the rule is critics go lower if you're gonna round down, not up,
Yeah,
because you want to be cool. So yeah, I'll go 3. It's a solid 3, but like I can hear an argument for a 4.
interesting. I think the length keeps it
Yeah,
from.
it's such a shame that this is something we keep harping on about because it's truly the only negative thing that we've said, but it really does affect your enjoyment of the movie and the effectiveness of the movie as well. Like it's a bit of a
Yeah.
shame that this one sticking point is it continuously keeps coming up because it's the same with me too, though. Like I keep thinking about that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not an insignificant thing either.
Yeah,
Like we're
yeah,
talking about like we're talking about an extra hour of film. Like it's not like it's a few minutes long. It's like it feels like it could be a tight 90, like we said, and it's 2.5.
yeah. 2.5 is
It's
really long.
it's
Yeah,
really, really, really too long.
yeah,
But it's also very confidently directed, very well performed by the lead actress whose name I
yeah.
don't have in front of me. And it's a really interesting look at just, you know, Winnipeg and Canada and the immigrant experience in general. So it's definitely worth checking out. Um, Maybe watch it in 2 chunks, but it's definitely worth checking out. And it's
Yeah, it's
interesting too,
yeah.
because normally I'm a guy who's like, no, if you're going to watch a movie, you should watch it straight through just to get like the experience of the movie. But there's so little that actually happens in this movie that you could totally like. It could have been like a 4 episode miniseries on CBC
I
or
was
something.
just thinking that. I was just thinking you could have chunked it into a miniseries and it could have been
Yeah,
maybe a little bit more interesting. But um yeah. It's too bad. Like it's 2.5 is that's long. That's a long movie.
it
It's a
is a
long
lot.
movie where just not a lot happens, but it's so you're really relying on like the experience, quote unquote experience of the movie as being that. Like I've this is very off topic, but like I've heard people criticize All Quiet on the Western Front, the new one, for being too long, and I'm like, yeah, but so much happens in that. Like it doesn't feel long. I was like, it's a war movie,
Well,
but
I
this
think
one, I'm like, cut an hour out.
there's
It will be
a
fine.
there's a lot of like film people push back against long movies at the moment,
Yeah,
which I think is a really interesting thing. And I think that
yeah.
sometimes I feel like it's warranted. Sometimes I feel like I definitely am acquainted with people who are like, anytime a movie is even approaching 2 hours, they're like, ugh, 2 hours. Well, that's too long. And I'm just like, well, sometimes a movie needs to be 2 hours, man. Like,
Yeah.
nobody complained that Avengers Endgame is like 3 hours long, right? Like,
But also, we'll crush through, binging on Netflix is like a thing. And so people will crush seasons upon seasons. And that's hours of television that you're just
yeah,
sitting there watching. So it is
100%.
just that idea. It's like our brains just need like a break, maybe. But I will also say,
I honestly
there's
just
only
think,
a handful of directors out there that can deal with a very long, like a 3 hour movie. There's only a few directors who can do that properly, and not make it feel like a waste. Like, Babylon is 3 hours 10. It's a long movie, and I already know, and I think Damien Chazelle is a very, very like good director. Like he's a very, very good director. But there's a ton of people shitting on him, saying like he doesn't know how to do a 3 hour plus movie, and
mm,
so it's tough. Like it's really difficult to hold people's attention for that long. I mean, this is
yeah.
2.5. But like 3 hours is it is long. Like I had to cut The Irishman in half. I think I didn't watch that all in one go.
Well, The Irishman should have been a miniseries too, if you ask me. But,
Yeah,
and I say that as a person who actually loved that movie. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say though is that like I think it's a mistake to prejudge a movie because it's long. If you've seen a movie and
yeah.
you're like, that was 3 hours and 10 minutes and it was too long, I think that's totally fair. But if you see like the marketing for a movie and it says this movie's going to be 3 hours and 10 minutes long, and you're like, no, that's a mistake.
I
Like,
guess it's like the imposition of like if you go to the library and you see like a really big book and you're just like, oh, that looks a bit daunting. Like, I don't want to even, like, you don't know anything about the book. You just go, that's a big book. And you're just like, it's going to take me a long time to get through. And I feel like people just kind of have that. Whereas, like, a TV show, you could be like, I'm just going to sit here for 45 minutes and watch an episode, or 50 minutes, whatever. And then maybe I carry on, maybe I don't. But I don't need to necessarily carry
Mhm.
on to finish the thing that's on my screen. And it's just a
Yeah,
weird way that we process stuff now. Because movies used to be really long, like back in the day. Like Gone with the Wind is they had intermissions in movies.
yeah.
So
And like,
different
yeah,
brain
Lawrence of
space
Arabia
now,
is
I
like
suppose.
3 hours long, and nobody
Yeah,
complains about
there you
that.
go.
Ben Hur is so long that Ben Hur is one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's actually one of my dad's all-time favorite movies too. And I grew up watching that movie. And for this, I'm going to use a word that maybe some of our younger listeners won't recognize, but that movie came on two VHSs.
I still
uh,
have my double Titanic two tape Titanic. I still got that.
yeah, yeah, and even like everyone loves the Lord of the Rings. Well, not everyone, but
Yeah.
99% of people love the Lord of the Rings. The short versions of those movies are 3 hours long. Like I still have the special edition DVD box sets of those movies,
Yeah.
and they are that's the movie. Each movie comes on two DVDs.
There you
There's
go.
too much movie for a DVD. It's crazy.
That is pretty nuts, actually, to think that it can't fit on one DVD. But like you
Yeah,
said, I mean, like the next movie we're gonna talk about, Polaris, that's a tight 90, and it's like it fits 90 perfectly, I think.
and interestingly, has a couple things in common,
Yeah,
other than being Canadian and winter set. Um, but also features lots of people talking with no subtitles. Is
yeah,
probably
and
the biggest
this
thing
is
in common.
a made up language, like a fictional language. So
Yeah, I'm unclear. I haven't had a chance to like do any like looking into this, but so the story of Polaris. Why don't you give us the rundown on Polaris? I think because
sure. So
yeah,
Polaris is set up in the Arctic, and I believe they shot in, I want to say, Northwest Territories.
Yukon. I think it
Um,
was the Yukon actually.
It was in Yukon, one of the
Yeah,
territories of
yeah.
Canada. And it's about a young girl who has been. Sorry. I'll start from the beginning. It is kind of post-apocalyptic ish, like it's set out in the future,
Yeah,
and
it's
there's a
set in
young
like
girl.
2144. I think is the year at the
Yeah,
beginning.
and so there's a little girl named Sumi, I believe is her name, and she is was raised by a polar bear, and her and the polar bear get what do you call it, they get detached. Like she gets kind of stolen by a group of um
Bad
kind of
guys.
mad, yeah, Mad Max like bandits. And
Yeah.
then in the movie is basically about her finding her way back to her mother, her the polar bear mother.
Hmm.
And it's about this little girl. They don't speak English. They have, it's a fictional language that they created for the film. The little girl, because she's raised by who's played by Viva Lee, who I adore. I think she's the best. I actually got to interview her, and that's going to come up at some point whenever Polaris makes it out to theatrical.
Ooh.
um and so Viva, she, like, talking to her was really interesting because she was saying one of the big things about the character is that because she's raised by a bear, her mannerisms and the way that she acts as an adult is very bear like, very animalistic. And so Viva, as a young actress, she was like 11 or 12 when she made that movie. um she just really got into this idea of she's like a child bear basically, and I thought that was
Hmm.
really, like, dope. I thought that was really cool. And yeah, it's an incredible movie. Like there's some weird bits to it, I would say. Like there's some aspects to it, there's like a frozen girl. It's kind of like an alien thing, maybe. I don't know. There's definitely something touching with the spiritual side of nature, and those connections are made. But generally, like it's an I think the idea of the movie, kind of, you're right. There's a lot to say that it is similar to Diaspora. The idea of the movie is very, very interesting. The execution, though, I thought of Polaris was great as well. But it's just there's like a few funky things in it that I remember thinking like, oh, that's kind of odd. But it works though. It's a cool movie. It's a really, really cool idea of a movie.
Yeah, I think that um, even without knowing that she had thought that, I thought it was super interesting how well Viva Lee like was very clearly a bear child.
Yeah.
Like there's a at the beginning there's one she gets sort of kidnapped and then she's manages to free herself and she ends up staying with this older woman and their whole interaction in which you don't understand a word they're saying but you do understand everything that they're saying
Yeah.
is super interesting, and that's a recurring sort of theme through the movie is that nobody's saying any words, but you do understand everything that they're saying. You do understand everything that they are meaning as well, which is, I think, a pretty incredible accomplishment. It could very well just have been gibberish, like, and
Yeah.
nothing more.
I mean,
Um,
in a way, it kind of was because there's no subtitles. Actually, we should probably point that out that there is no subtitles in this movie. Like they don't tell you what they're saying. They kind of come up with their own language, but we're not actually privy to what they're actually talking about.
but at no point are you ever confused as to
Yeah,
what anyone
yeah,
is intending or meaning. It's
hmm
amazing, there's that what's the old saying that like 70% of communication is how you look and 20% is how you sound and 10% is what you say.
mm,
And so this really leans into the idea that like that 90% is
yeah,
actually a thing, because like I at
yeah.
no point was I ever like confused during this movie. There's no point where I was like, what is this character doing? Like, because everything they're doing is very clearly laid out. And there is some weirdness in the movie too. There's like the main character has some connection to like the land and is able to like heal herself and people
Right.
and
Yeah.
and
Right.
like
Right. Right.
one of the first things that happens is at the beginning of the movie she's missing an eye and she takes an eye from another woman and like sticks it in her face and it works. It's
Yeah.
super interesting, and we haven't even gotten to the part about how like everyone in this movie is a woman. There's no man in this movie, which
Yeah.
is
It's really
also
interesting.
really
Really,
interesting
really
choice, I
interesting.
thought.
Yeah, and especially because the kid in it is she's young, like she's a child, so it is like some there is like somebody did make a kid, so how did that happen?
Yeah.
But she's not like a baby, but like yeah, there's kid, and it's that is fascinating to me. I also want to point out the polar bear. The polar bear's name is Aggie, and this was her last movie that she ever did. So she's worked as like a movie polar bear her whole life, and
Oh,
then this is her very last movie. She retired after this one, and she lives on a conservation in Manitoba, which has like a bunch of polar bears there. So she's living her best life over there now. I
oh,
thought that was a very sweet note. I
that is
was like,
very
oh, that's
sweet.
cute. Yeah, and so I was like, that's lovely. And they did use a real polar bear. Although Viva wasn't all like she didn't climb on top of the polar bear or anything like that. That's probably
Well,
not
yeah,
safe.
that makes sense.
But yeah, but they did use a real polar bear. But yeah, sorry to your point about it's just women. Like Dakota, actually, I'll plug this. Dakota and I interviewed the director, Kirsten Carthew.
Carthew, yeah.
Carthew is, I think that's how you pronounce it. We interviewed her during Fantasia this year, and I don't think that there was a real like a specific purpose of saying like we're only going to use women. Like it was just, but it was just kind of an interesting note of, and it's never addressed in the film. Like they don't talk about like, oh, there's no men, like what happened or anything like that. Again, we don't
Hmm.
really know what they're saying, so maybe they did say that, but it's not a point. It's not like it's not a plot point in there that no men are around anymore. But one thing I loved about that was I thought that by putting those little details in, when you first get into the world feels very complete and very realized because they're not talking about this is just the way life is for them, and that's how things go. Because I
Hmm.
think if you have like a tourist in the area, which is usually your audience, then they feel the need to explain everything, but they don't do that. They just kind of you get into the world and then you just go, and I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, the only introduction to what's going on is like two lines of text and a title card
Yeah,
at the beginning.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
think I think you're right. That's there's definitely something to be said for the type of film where a new character shows up and has to learn everything so the audience can learn it. But I think when well executed, like this movie, you definitely don't need that, and the movie's often better for it. And like we definitely understand post apocalypses at this point.
Yeah.
Like it's the only. I mean the sort of bandit gang's whole aesthetic is very Mad Max, and
Very. Yeah.
the biggest difference here is that it's set after basically it's set during an ice age instead of during an endless summer. Um, and that's A, very Canadian, and B, an interesting choice because we often, it's most post apocalypses in movies are set in wastelands, desert wastelands, and so I do appreciate whenever it's literally anything else.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I love that she used, so I believe Kirsten is from the territories as well.
Mhm.
I think she grew up in the Northwest Territories, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing I liked about it, wait, where's Yellowknife? Is that Yukon or Northwest Territories? Northwest Territories. I think Yellowknife's Northwest Territories. Um, but I think
Feel
what
bad
the
that now
cool
that you've asked me, I'm like, wait, which one is it?
I used to remember because it was like Yellowknife and Yukon, they both have Y and they do not go together. So it was never YY. It was always Y and then something else. That's how I remember it. Um, yeah, that's my geography memory coming in from grade school. But I would say so she made another movie. Her first movie was called The Sun at Midnight, and she made it in the territories but during the summertime, so like long, very long summer days, and very
Mm.
very kind of lush greenery. And I think that that's really cool that we have filmmakers in Canada who are using landscape like the territories, like northern Canada, because it's not, I don't know if it's a place that a lot of people think to go to make a movie, but I like that she's done two and they are complete opposite seasons so that you can film and show the beauty of the north of Canada in the summertime and North Canada in the wintertime, because they're equally very, very beautiful, but they are obviously very, very different terrains to work with. So I thought that was cool. She's a really great director, though. I liked seeing some of her other stuff.
Yeah, I definitely need to check out more of like her other film.
Yeah, and she's
Is
got
it?
a cool short film as well. It's called Fish Out of Water.
Oh, I
And
think I might have seen that actually.
yeah, that was cool. Like I big fan of Kirsten. Or I realized actually, like she's I think titled as KC
Hmm.
Carthew, but her name. I'm buddies with her. No, I'm not. I'm not actually. Spoke
But
to
you
her
have
on
spoken
Zoom
to her. You're
once.
buddies with her the same way
But
that
yeah,
like
she's
I have.
great. I have spoken to
Yeah,
her. Yes, I have spoken to her. She
you're
was
the
really
you're
cool.
friends. You're friends with her the same way that I'm friends with Tom Hardy. We spoke once.
Did you speak with Tom Hardy? That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, true story. So this is a number of years ago because he was in town shooting that not very good rom com with Chris Pine and
Oh,
Reese
um,
Witherspoon. This Means War.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's a good
so
movie.
I was with my then partner and Simon and his wife. We were on Granville Island here in Vancouver, shopping, hanging out, and I go into a kitchen store, and my partner's in a different store, uh, and my partner's in a different store with Simon's wife, and Simon's outside in this like square, and this beautiful woman walks up to him because Simon has, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Simon has the cutest dog. Like, I'm sorry, all the other dogs, but Freud is the cutest dog. Dumb as a post, but the sweetest, cutest dog. And this beautiful woman comes up and starts asking about Freud, about the dog. And so Simon's carrying on this whole conversation, and this woman's like partner, like Simon doesn't notice at first, comes and sits down on the bench beside them. And then I come out of the store with the things that I'm buying, and I'm like, I look over at Simon, and I see the dog, and I see this woman, and I'm like, that's Tom Hardy.
Wow.
And so I walk over there, and we just all like, I don't know, I think it took a moment for Simon to realize what
Real.
was happening, um, because at that point, and I feel terrible that I don't remember. I can see her face, but I can't remember her name. Tom Hardy's wife.
Is it
Um,
the? I
hmm?
can't remember her name either. I don't know. Is it
Charlotte Riley. That's her name.
Charlotte? Someone is that who she's is like the same person? Because I
Yeah, Charlotte Riley. They've been married for a long time. Um, but so we get over there, and like eventually, like we just start talking with Tom Hardy. We talked with him for like 5 or 10 minutes. He told a whole story about going on the like going and visiting Jonathan Ross and like just like existing and how he was. at some point I was like, look, man, like I don't, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of yours. And he was like, oh, thanks, whatever. And then we parted ways. And the funniest part of the story to me is that Simon's wife, who is the loveliest person in the world, comes out of the store, and she's standing there while we're all talking with Tom Hardy, and he's in the middle of telling a story about being at Jonathan Ross's house. And then when we part ways, and he's a very lovely human being, and so is Charlotte Riley. And then Simon's wife just looks right at us and is like, "How does that guy know Jonathan Ross?" Like, because she didn't like put together that it was Tom Hardy. Yeah, it was. It was a fun time. So yeah, now we're friends with Tom Hardy.
I would say you are better friends with Tom Hardy then than I am with Kirsten Carthew, because you guys actually met in person. I just spoke on the phone with
Oh,
Kirsten. So there you go. You got one up on me on that. That's cool though. See, that's the joy of living in Vancouver. You get to
there are a
run
lot of things
into,
that shoot here.
yeah, tons. But Toronto is more so you just get to see the Suits crew. Not anymore, but that used to be a thing. You just
Yeah,
see the Suits people walking around all the time. But
that
that's about it.
is that is true.
But anyways, back to Polaris. Nothing about that.
That's and yeah, that's it's very much like Polaris. Um, so I mean, I think that we're pretty strongly recommending this film. I would say it's still, I believe, playing as part of the online festival, and
Mhm.
it's kind of great. And I hope it gets some accolades in the new year. I don't know. I don't know that it's the kind of movie that would get um, any of the like sort of quote big awards at the CSAs, but it already won. It already won the cinematography award at Whistler,
I was
uh,
just
and it got.
Viva's been awarded as well for her performance because she is great in it, and so
Yeah,
I could see her getting
she got
something
an
at the CSAs.
honorable mention for the Morals Performance
Yeah,
Award at Whistler. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, maybe I hope she does because she's great.
I
Uh,
really like her.
yeah,
She's like one that I'm like, oh, I can't wait for her to do because she's so young. So I'm just like, I can't wait for her to do all the cool things because I think that'll be yeah, I think that'll be really really great. But she's yeah, I can't wait to see more of what she's gonna get up to because she is so young, so she's got a lot ahead of her.
yeah, yeah. So I'm still I think for me I'm sort of dancing on the precipice between giving it a 3 and a 4 overall, but I think it's probably a 4 for me out of 5.
um I pulled up my review that I did during Fantasia for Exclaim, and I gave it an 8 out of 10, so I'm gonna stick with a 4 as well. I'm
Nice.
not changing on that. I still think it's a solid 8. Like I think it's a good
Yeah,
movie.
it's certainly again it's one of the best I think executed Canadian films I've seen this year for sure.
Definitely. And I like the landscape. I'm loving this trend. Like Slashback was another one. Like this idea of going up to the north and filming up there. And like I think that that's really cool because Canada's a lot of stuff gets shot here, but typically it's used as something else. So I think that something very distinctly Canadian that you can't really say that it's somewhere else in the world. I guess you
Hmm.
could. You could say it's the Arctic, or you could say it's Russia or whatever. But
Yeah.
there's just something very Canadian about it, and I love that. I love that. More and more films are getting made up there, up there.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a. It's too early in the morning because I keep thinking of like, oh yeah, there's a great movie from last year that was set in like northern Quebec on a reserve,
Mm.
and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it.
Well, I'll say
But yeah,
there's a show I've been watching, Three Pines on Prime. They shoot that in like a remote area of Quebec, I believe, and it looks great.
yeah,
And
that's
it's
actually
in
based
winter.
on a pretty famous Canadian
Yeah,
novel by the same
like Canada's
name.
Agatha Christie.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it turns out we live in a very beautiful country,
We do. It is a very, very gorgeous
and
country.
especially if you like stark landscapes, which we have many of.
Vast, never-ending landscapes. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, but I mean, it is undeniably beautiful. Like
Very much so.
even the the stark, or to use a more cynical word, the bleak parts of
It's not bleak.
yeah, it's not really bleak.
It's
Bleak's an unfair
not
word,
bleak.
But
It's
like, yeah,
very rich with snow.
yeah,
It's not bleak. I think it depends on what your definition of bleak. Like to me, bleak would be, I mean, no offense, Scotland, but like parts of Scotland can get very bleak. Parts
yeah,
of England can be very bleak as well. Like the gray, to me, it's more about the gray, and I think that the Arctic, because maybe it's got the bright white and whatnot. Like I don't really consider it bleak.
yeah. I think that's an unfair word, but it is beautiful,
It
and
is very beautiful.
I like it. I need to go north at some point. Yeah.
Easier time for you to get north than me, so you should take advantage of that.
Is it though? I mean, I feel like
Yeah,
it's.
relatively speaking, because you're kind of already in a
I guess
space
I'm.
that you can just go north. Whereas me going north, I hit what's that thing called? Hudson's Bay.
Yeah, it's true. I think I'm technically more north than you are right now. So
You are, yeah, you
yeah,
are.
yeah. That
But
movie.
anyways,
It's that movie I was talking about. It's called Bootlegger. You should see it. It's
oh,
called
nice. I
Bootlegger.
should watch that. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
interesting.
it's about a young woman who goes home to her reserve and, like, interestingly, uh, begins a campaign. Like, it's a dry reserve, and she has a whole, like, mission to open up the sale of alcohol because the bootleggers are ruining the community. It's super interesting.
I'll definitely check it out. Like, do you know where that is?
I haven't seen it in a year, so no.
Oh,
It's
I'll
it's
try to
Canadian.
find it.
It's honestly, it's probably on Crave. Most of
Okay.
the stuff that we've talked, most of the stuff I end up seeing that is Canadian is at least funded in part by Crave. So a lot of
Bell
it ends up
Media.
there. Bell
They've
Media,
been.
man,
Yeah.
it's a part of the oligopoly that is Canadian Telecom. That's, again, as with global warming, we should not go down that road
We
right
don't need to get into that right now.
now. Good. Well, so is there anything before we sign off? That's all I've actually seen from the festival, but I'm still super excited to see more. But is there anything else you want to call out from Whistler?
I'll say like the two that I mentioned before, so Niagara, and Midnight at the Paradise. I just completely forgot what that was called. Midnight at the Paradise, Niagara, and there's also Coyote, which I haven't seen yet. I still need to watch it, but I've heard really great things from some of the other people that I went to Whistler with, and they all said it was quite good. So, yeah, there's a few like, and there's a cool short film packet as well that you can go and watch. Some of them were really. I actually went to one of the short film programs that they were showing, and it was great. It was packed, which I found interesting because I think that you have a lot of different filmmakers, so a lot of their friends come in.
Hmm.
But it was like busier than some of the other screenings that I went to, which was interesting. But yeah, like there's a lot of cool things over at Whistler, so definitely check it out. Like you said, it's up until January 2nd. Um, and I think if you're in Whistler, it's a cool idea. You can like still watch the movie after you've done skiing, but just in your
Hmm.
hotel. But still
Yeah,
fun.
it's still pretty cool,
Yeah,
and I'm glad I got to cover it again because it's a great little festival,
definitely.
and it ends up being kind of like just the last one on my calendar every year now. It's a nice way to cap off the
Yeah,
year.
it's a nice end of the year. Actually, it's a nice one to end the year off.
Yeah. Well, let's call it there. Rachel, thank you again for being my co-host for this month.
No worries.
I think we have at least
No
one more
worries.
episode, I believe, if all goes to plan, that we'll be recording for next week.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, where can the people find you?
You can go to rachelkh.com, and then my social, so Twitter and Instagram are _RachelKH.
And
Oh,
go to
and
go
Contrasing Pod.
and Country Pod
Yeah, that too.
and Exclaim and that stuff
And
and Slash Film and the Globe, and you're just
yeah,
crushing it lately. So
crying.
well
Thank
done.
you.
Well done. And everyone who's listening, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. And if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you. We love you all. If you've liked what you heard, please consider um, any amount of support is amazing. And the most meaningful is actually if you could go to your podcasting platform of choice and smash that like button or give us a 5-star review. We would be super appreciative. And if you would like to support us a little more directly, we do have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, all of which will be linked in the show notes. You can also find us at awesomefriday.ca and on Instagram and Twitter at awesomefridayca, or me at SmatthewAF on Twitter, as long as Twitter meaningfully exists, at least. We record this year, or I record this year in Vancouver on the unceded lands of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. I don't know what nations Rachel land she lives on, so I can't call it out, but we acknowledge
I
that.
should know this, and I'm so sorry, but I do not. You know what? I'm going to get that information for the next time we record. I'm going to do that for you.
Thank you. I think it's important. And yeah, that's it for the show this week. So thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this awesome Friday.